Alrighty. So we've pretty much covered most of Gulp's public API. Gulp source, Gulp desk, series, parallel, task. But there's one big one that we haven't talked about, one very important one, and that's called watch. Now, Gulp.watch is built with a package called Gaze, and the idea is that Gulp.watch can basically monitor a set of directories. And when any of those files changes, Gulp will run a task. And I think that's pretty awesome. So let's go ahead and see how we can use it. It's very, very simple to use. So also, I just really like that owl. Anyway, if we hop back over into our Gulp file, let's go ahead and make a task that will watch our styles and our scripts and then invoke the appropriate methods or the appropriate tasks when they get built, or when they change, rather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a function dev watch. Now, I'm prefixing this with dev because in general, I can't think of any use case where you would want to watch in production. It's really a development thing, and you really need to do this. Having to go through and manually gulp scripts every time you change a file will drive you insane. So using Gulp.watch is an amazing aspect of this tool that is incredibly useful. So let's take a look at its API. Gulp.watch expects a file path followed by a task, and that's it. So let's do our styles first. I'm going to say Gulp.watch on config styles source. So again, config styles source is up here, and it'll take an array of globs. And then I'm going to say Gulp series dev styles. So I'm going to pass in a task. So I can pass in a function, I can pass in a anonymous function, or I can pass in a Gulp series with dev styles. You cannot pass in a string. You have to wrap that with a Gulp series or a Gulp parallel. Next up, I'm going to set up another watch. Config scripts source with Gulp series dev scripts. And that's it. Now you might be noticing something about this dev watch task. I'm not returning a stream, nor am I accepting a callback. When Gulp encounters a watch command, it's going to keep the process open until you hit Control-C to stop it. So it has no need to know when the watch ended or not. All right, so we've created the function, but let's go ahead and actually register it with Gulp. So I'm going to do this right under dev scripts. I'm going to say Gulp task, and I'm going to do something interesting here. I'm going to do Gulp.watch, and then I'm going to do Gulp.series, and I'm going to pass in dev followed by dev watch. So what am I doing here? Well, generally when you wake up in the morning and you get on your computer and you want to start a project and start working on whatever you're working on, the first thing it'll do is do Gulp.watch. That's your that's the first thing you do. You'll always have a Gulp.watch window open somewhere so that your stuff gets compiled as you develop. But you want to make sure that you have a build already available before you do that. Because otherwise you'll do Gulp.watch and then you won't be able to, in the same command line, do a dev build. So I like to do a dev build before I start the watch. So I'm starting a Gulp.series that'll do a dev build and then a watch. Anyway, let's see how this works. Gulp dev watch. And what's going on here? Task never defined dev. So I'm going to have to do that underneath that. That's an kind of annoying thing, but I guess it kind of makes sense the way it goes and processes through that, because Gulp.series is code that's actually executed because we're calling it function. So it does need to know where dev is before it can actually perform this task. Anyway, point is we now are watching. So we noticed that we did our dev and we ended our dev. And then after that, we started our watch. So now let's go ahead and edit some less. Come in here, and let's go ahead and split this up, and I'll open up my styles site.css next to it. And let's just throw some stuff in here. H1, font, weight, normal. Now I'm going to hit Control-S. Check that out. In pretty much 26 milliseconds, I now have H1 font weight normal. If I come over here and say strong color red, I don't know, sorry, it's just fun to do. But you get the point. If I also came in, there is a problem with styles, but I'll show you guys scripts first before I show you the problem with styles. I'm emphasizing the issue with styles just because it's something that you will run into. And if we come in here and we open up our application.js on one side and our application.js on the other side, we can do the same thing. So console log whoa, for example, and it appears. It took slightly more time to compile the scripts, but that's pretty normal. Anyway, we have a problem with our styles. So remember how we have a single output style file, site.css, but in my styles, I have a site.css, a site.less that imports a header. Problem is, if I come here and change my header, it does not trigger the watch. Now, it doesn't trigger the watch because our source input that we're passing into the watch is not a glob for all the less files in the style folder. So we got to fix that. To fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into our gulp file. I just really wanted to emphasize this point because I can see people getting frustrated. It's like, I'm editing the header file, but it's not changing. Remember, our styles were just doing site.less. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another config option. I'm going to do source directory. So source dir, or how about just spell it out? Source directory, whatever. That's funny. I feel like spelling out directory, but not source. Whatever. I'm going to go ahead and pass in an array of globs. And in this case, it's going to be source styles. And then I'm going to pass in anything dot less or CSS, because we might have CSS files in our styles directory. You know, who knows? So anyway, so now I did that. I'm going to jump down into our watch task, and instead of doing styles.source, I'll do source directory. Now, I changed the gulp file. That does not mean that the dev watch is going to pick up on that changed gulp file. So what I'm going to have to do is terminate this by hitting Control-C, and then hitting the up arrow and doing gulp dev watch again. And now, if I split my window and hop open to site CSS and then go ahead and open up header.less, now I can come in here and say body text font style italic. Hit Control-S and check that out. Now our header.less, even though it's not the file that's actually being compiled, when it changes, our site CSS gets recompiled. And that's usually the behavior you're going to want if you're doing this like me, where I have a single CSS file being emitted. So let's see if we introduce an error. So if we introduce an error, we get this nice little message saying, well, we get it twice, but we still get a nice little message that tells us exactly what's going on. In this case, we have a parse error on line 11 of header.less. So that's cool. Now, the error handling is going to be up to the plugin. So for example, if I created an error inside of our Babel code, if I said let s, oh, right, well, Babel is just going to, that is valid. If I just say let, I forgot that JavaScript doesn't enforce semicolons. We will get, again, two nice little errors. But in this case, we get a bit of a nicer error from Babel directly. It says unexpected token on line 14. So yeah, that is the basics of watching. So, yeah, the next thing I want to talk about is incredibly important. Another really important thing that is really, really, really going to save you a lot of time. And that is the concept of live reloading. What if I told you that not only do our files get recompiled every time we hit save, but that our browser will reload those files as well? Well, it's a feature called live reloading, and there's many, many different live reloading options out there, some of which we're going to cover when we talk about things like Webpack, which have built-in live reloading, but that's a different story. And so we're just going to pick one and use it in our gulp file. So let's go ahead and set that up. So the package we're going to be using is going to be called Gulp Live Reload. Now, Gulp Live Reload works with a special Chrome plugin that you can go ahead and grab. If you just searched for Chrome Live Reload, you can go ahead and grab it from the Chrome store. And very, very, very handy tool. Other live reload systems actually inject HTML or inject JavaScript into your page that will connect to your Gulp.watch task and get informed when files change. Live Reload is a bit different. Live Reload is an extension that will listen and connect to your Gulp task outside of the actual page itself. So it's up to your preference. Like I said, there's a lot of different Live Reloads out there. But let's go ahead and bring it in. Not surprisingly, we start with npm install, as do most things in Gulp and Node and npm. And we're simply going to do gulp npm install gulp live reload save. Now, there's going to be 2 steps for live reload. The first step is during our watch task, we need to start the live reload server. The second step is when something changes that needs to be reloaded, we need to add that to our stream. So let's go ahead and live reload our CSS first. Now in Gulp.js, we again are getting live reload loaded because of the Gulp load plugins. And let's go ahead and take care of the first step. So underneath dev.watch, I'm going to go ahead and say money.live reload. And whoops, money.live reload.listen. I have the stupid. Okay, so now we have that happening. That starts the live reload server itself. But we still have another step. And that step is we need to actually go in and when our... because right now live reload doesn't know when things have changed. But if in our styles, at the end of the stream, right? At the end of the stream, once all the file names are determined, the actual, like, for real file names that are being served on our web server, I'm going to pipe it in to live reload. Now, I could do this. I could pipe it into live reload like that. I'll just do a... I'll leave it there. I could do a gulp if. The thing is, it's not going to matter for a production build. It's not going to do anything because the server's just not going to be started during a production build. So I'll leave it like it is. So this has to happen at the end of your stream once all the file names are determined. And so you go ahead and you just do money.live reload. That's it. So I can come over here and I could say Gulp.watch. And I'm going to go ahead and I have an HTTP server that is listening to, whoops, Gulp.dev.watch. I have an HTTP server that is listening in the public directory. So if you don't, hop over into public directory and start that server. And I'm going to bring over a Chrome window right here. Open up my dev tools. Now, it's not going to work right now because I don't have the plugin enabled. To enable the plugin, find the live reload button, which is right here, and click it. Now, I opened up my dev tools for a reason. If I hop over to network, let's take a look at what the live reload plugin did. It went ahead and it opened up a WebSocket connection directly into my Gulp process, which is pretty neat. So let's go ahead and see what happens if I change. This is going to be really odd. It's going to be really hard. Well, I guess you're going to have to not see one of these windows. So it'll be the Gulp window. Let's go ahead and see what happens when I come in to source styles site.less and I do something really, really obnoxious like body background blue. And I hit Control S. And now our background's blue. Remove that, hit Control S, and almost instantly, of course, if you have an actual production-sized group of styles, it might take 100, 300 milliseconds. But right now, since we have so little, it's pretty much just happening instantly. And so yeah, so you can see over here in the Gulp window that we have been running this task every time we've edited this file. See, every time I hit Control S, and we also see that live reload is telling us which files were told to the browser to reload. And if I come back to the browser, if I open up the WebSocket and look at the frames, I can see that live reload, the connection it has to Gulp, is getting the information of which files have changed. Now, in the case of CSS, it does that immediately. It does that hot. By hot, I mean it actually takes that CSS file and reloads it on the browser without reloading the entire page, which is amazing. If you're not used to doing live reload, if this is your first time seeing this sort of stuff, I guarantee you when you're working on an application, being able to have your site on one monitor, your code editor on another, and have it hot load your CSS, that saves so much time. Now let's see what happens with scripts, because scripts are a bit more interesting. Let's go ahead and we have to edit our gulp file to actually tell live reload when our scripts have changed. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add this at the end of the pipeline. Again, that's important. And I'm simply going to say money live reload. And that's it. So now I can hop back over here. And again, I edited my gulp file. So I must stop the watch task and restart it. Don't forget to do that. So now, if I come over here and open up my source scripts application, and let's say I do a console log, hey. Well, that's actually not going to do much. Let's do document write whoa. There we go. Whoa was written. And we can do it again a bunch of times if we want to. We get a lot of whoas. So just by hitting Control S, it reloaded the page. Now, what's interesting about JavaScript is that it can't hot reload JavaScript. So it actually refreshes the entire page. You can see up there the little spinny thing happen every time I hit Control S. So it is actually going out and completely refreshing the page. And that's the behavior you want. Now, we'll see in a later video, we'll see in a later video a tool that has the capability of hot reloading JavaScript, but it's fairly complex. It's mostly for when you're working with a library called React. In general, just keep in mind, when you live reload a script, you're going to get a refresh. When you live reload a style, you're going to get that hot loaded. Sometimes when I'm doing a massive refactoring, I'll actually stop my watch task just so it's not hitting there and refreshing over and over and over again. Or maybe sometimes I'll disable the live reload on my JavaScript task. But that just depends on what you're doing. Half the time I find it incredibly useful. Half the time I find it annoying. But you have the option. So yeah, stuff and things. That is live reloading. Couldn't be simpler. So this pretty much concludes the Surface API of Gulp. Yeah, there's a couple other things you might want to be aware of, some optimization things. Like, for example, there's this really nice plugin, oh, where are you? Called Gulp Cached, which, let's say you have a bunch of JavaScript files, but you change one, it'll recompile all of those JavaScript files. By piping in cache after you've done your Gulp source, what'll happen is it'll remove any file that has not changed at all. Now, it only makes sense during watching. Obviously, when you do an actual build without watching, you want everything compiled. But if you're watching, use the cache, the cached plugin, because that way you're not running 10 million JavaScript files through Babel when you only changed one. Other transpilers such as Typescript have incremental building built into them, which take advantage of watch tasks. Like, for example, if we looked at Gulp Typescript, this is for Typescript. If you look at that, there is a way to do incremental buildings, incremental builds, which will massively speed things up. But it's a consideration you should always have when you're doing watching. How do I make this faster? Because if you have a large JS application, you don't want to recompile everything when you change one thing. Either your transpiler might have incremental builds, or you use something like Gulp Cached. Both would work just fine. And that's how you deal with that. So for you guys, now it's a matter of deciding what you want to do. Do you want to optimize images? Do you want to transform HTML files? Do you want to include your Angular templates in one file? Do you want to add headers and footers to every file that passes through a pipeline? You can do all of that. And if something doesn't meet your criteria, make your own transform. So that pretty much concludes all of the plugins I really wanted to talk about so far with Gulp. We have a couple more things to work on. One, organization, and two, how something like this translates into Gulp 3, in case you're stuck on Gulp 3 or stuck on a project that uses Gulp 3. So I guess we'll see you guys in the next video.